Hey everybody, this is Cami Westall with your exciting video lecture for Tuesday, September 25th. Sorry for being even more nasally than more nasally than usual. I am running on a lot of codeine right now after coming down with quite a plaguing cold bug thing the other day. Anyway, yes, already distracted. But here we go with politics in the 19th century with your instructor on coding. So we'll look here at some of these different isms that are listed because there are a lot of different movements in the 19th century. Let's talk about some of the reasons why these political changes are happening and also what Congress of Vienna seeks to achieve, the same as Congress of Vienna that occurs. So I may move a little more quickly, but that's because you have the capability of pausing this video and writing things down as you may need. These isms have nothing to do with the Illinois Society for Microbiology, but I found an image for ism. That we'll look at today are conservatism, liberalism, nationalism, communism, or Marxism, when we get to that, and early socialism. I don't think I have them in the same order in this presentation, but those are the big isms that emerge here during the 19th century, which again is the 1800s if you're one of those people who gets your centuries confused with the years that occur. I'm about to call. Okay. Conservatism is what we'll begin with. And it's a little bit different. Conservatism and liberalism are a little bit opposite how we think of them today if you follow United States politics a lot. Conservatism at this point is an ideology based on tradition, order, and social stability. It is also resistant to abrupt change. These are people who support the kings, the queens, the monarchies. They don't like all of that upheaval. And after the French Revolution, they had a lot of reasons to distrust all of that social change that occurred. They wanted things to be stable. They thought having a monarchy, a traditional form of government, with predictable changes that would occur with more constancy, fewer transitions. They thought that was the way to go, the way that was going to bring the most security to Europe as a whole. Things had been chaotic in this era where people tried to bring about change. And so when Napoleon was overthrown, the Congress of Vienna met throughout the years of 1814 and 1815. So remember 1812, that was Napoleon's failed invasion of Russia. He kind of gradually lost power the next couple of years. First he was exiled to Elba, came back in 1815, lost the Battle of Waterloo, and so this is going on while he's trying to regain his power. And then when he loses at Waterloo up in Belgium, he is shipped further off. And these people continue to meet. These are leaders of the European countries who meet at the Congress of Vienna. Vienna is in Austria, or the Austrian Empire at this time. These are conservatives. They say, look at the chaos that has happened, that has occurred. We need to bring back order. Order is what we're most concerned with. And so we think having monarchies is the best way to preserve this order. The head of this meeting at the Congress of Vienna was von Metternich. He's kind of similar to Hillary Clinton as the Secretary of State today. He's not a king, but he's in charge of the diplomatic relations, foreign affairs for the Austrian Empire, and he's a big advocate of this conservative ideology and conservative mindset, wanting to restore Europe to what it had been before the French Revolution, when things tended to be more ordered. And so he and the Congress of Vienna, if you remember, Napoleon had his grand empire, and all of these colored places were either under his control pretty much directly, or at least indirectly they were allied with him. So what the Congress of Vienna has to do is they have to redraw the political map of Europe. So the Congress of Vienna is tasked with redrawing the political map of Europe, because when Napoleon loses No one's going to continue to dominate that much land. So look how different this had been. Napoleon's Grand Empire. Look at this versus what they come up with instead. This was the final product that the Congress of Vienna came up with. France has been drastically reduced in size, so France loses a big old chunk of land in what's the Netherlands and Belgium and into Italy. So they lose land. What you see here is they try to establish kind of a balance of power. Britain preserves its land. Austrian Empire gets even bigger, so it's going to be a power player. Prussia, still powerful. Russia, powerful. These are all kingdoms where the leaders are going to have a lot of control. All of them are going to have emperors or czars, which are all pretty much like kings. Still added king in Great Britain. And in France, they reinstate a king, Louis the 18th. So Louis the 18th is put back in charge of France. Now, we last saw Louis the 16th get beheaded via the guillotine. So what the heck happened to Louis the 17th? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, that's enough. Louis the 17th was the young son of Louis the 16th. He was the one who was pretty much abused and underwent horrible things in prison as a boy when the family was arrested and his dad and mom were beheaded. But this guy, Louis the 18th, he was the younger brother of Louis the 16th. So Louis the 16th's son had been killed. Therefore, they went to the next closest male relative, and they went to Louis the 18th. Louis the 18th, they chose this number of Louis the 18th to say, well, I shouldn't be I shouldn't be the 17th king named Louis. There was another one before me. And he was killed in prison. So they tried to honor the fact to say the monarchy was never destroyed. It was illegally discarded during the revolution, but it never should have been taken away in the first place. So they tried to honor the idea of a monarchy. They had the Louis the 17th, who was the young son of Louis the 16th, by this guy taking the title Louis the 18th. And things are actually pretty calm during Louis the 18th's reign. He doesn't do anything to upset things too much. But when he dies, his younger brother takes over, who looks like a Disney cartoon or something from this image. But Charles the 10th. So we've got someone with a different name. Hooray, Charles. Charles the 10th rules France from 1824 until 1830. Now, Charles is a little bit more aggressive in his conservatism. That sounds kind of ironic, but Charles upsets the boat a little more. What was happening is that even though things had been pretty peaceful during the reign of Louis the 18th, Charles is less willing to see common people gain any rights. There were still people in France who said, now what about the rights that common people had been able to gain? And they turned, and what was starting to happen is even in other countries, especially England, where there was still a king, common people were slowly gaining more rights. And those rights and people who supported those rights tended to be known as liberals. So today, in kind of the political connotations of 2012, liberals are typically associated as people who support more government. But liberal, you get that idea of being liberated, being freed. Initially, the liberals are people who wanted to be as free as possible. They didn't want to be under the controls of someone else. They didn't want these kings and queens, privileged people, just telling them what to do. They wanted freedom to do that. They didn't want someone interfering with their rights. They wanted less government involvement. These are people who wanted as much freedom from control as possible. And so post-Enlightenment, even though the French Revolution kind of fizzled out, you still got a lot of folks in Europe who are saying, hey, we live in a culture where we should be able to have freedoms. We don't need wealthy, rich government people telling us what to do. And in France, you had this little, similar to a parliament, but not, hang on, I have to cough again. I'm back. In France, you had a government that was similar to a parliament known as the Chamber of Deputies. And what happens is towards the end of Charles's reign in office, there are a bunch of political liberals who win seats in the Chamber of Deputies. So liberals in France, the Chamber of Deputies wasn't super powerful. The king had most of the power. But you had these liberals, people who wanted more freedom, who were more resistant to a powerful government. They were elected into the Chamber of Deputies. Well, Charles steps in, and he refuses to allow those liberal Chamber of Deputies to take their seat in the chamber. And that causes a major uproar. Leads to an 1830 revolution. You get this famous painting of the half-naked Amazon lady here in this 1830 revolution, where the French are protesting this king interfering with their ways yet again. So, I don't know why this guy's laying here without his pants on, but this became a very famous portrait. It's very dark. There's a lot of action. We'll talk about this painting later when we get to the Romantic era when we discuss the arts of the 19th century. But basically, Charles X becomes one of 3 French leaders in a row who's forced to flee to England for safety. So Charles flees. He quits. He abdicates in 1830. People weren't happy. They bring in a new king, and he's not just a Louis, but he's Louis Philippe. And he is known as the bourgeois monarch. Bourgeois is a word that kind of just means middle class or of the people. It's the same word from where cities get the burg, like Spartanburg or Pittsburgh. So just of the people. He's known as being of the people. Here he is all dressed out in his regalia. But normally he just dresses in a suit, an everyday suit that people wore at that time. He doesn't try to show off or put on airs or anything fancy like that. So he tried to identify with the people. So things settle back down for about 18 years. And then an incident happens in 1848 where the people tried to appeal to Louis Philippe. And something happened. It was like a dinner party outside. The guards sort of blocked off access to Louis. The French, because they're French people, they go crazy again. And in 1848, because they felt like Louis Philippe, who was okay at first, now Louis Philippe wasn't being liberal enough for them. And so Louis Philippe is overthrown in these revolutions of 1848, which this was a mess. These revolutions spread all throughout Europe. They kind of start in Paris with people resistant to Louis Philippe, feeling like Louis Philippe isn't responsive to them. And they spread throughout the Germany area. They spread into Austria and Hungary with people all over Europe saying this is our chance to fight for more rights, to fight for more freedoms from our powerful oppressors. And so there's all of this fighting that happens that year, and there's some changes that occur pretty rapidly, but there are no real permanent changes that come out of this very, very bloody, turbulent year in 1848. But this was a big year with revolutions happening all throughout Europe, people trying to throw off the people who they felt like were unfairly oppressing them. And 1848, Louis Philippe and all of this mess, he's forced to abdicate. So like Charles X did, abdicate, fancy word for quit if you're a king or queen. He abdicates, and now France goes back to having a republic. So French like to keep things chaotic, of course. They go back to their second republic. Do you remember where the first republic was? Pause. The first republic was back in 1792 when right before they killed Louis the 16th, he was still alive, but they said, look, he's tried to abandon us, he tried to flee the scene, so we are establishing ourselves as a republic. So now this is the Second Republic, and for namesake, they like to make things even more confusing. And you've got a Louis and a Napoleon who's now in charge, rocking the mustache. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, is elected as president of the Second Republic in 1848. So Louis Philippe kicked out. They get a new form of government completely, a republic, where you elect your officials. He is elected as president. He's got the name because his uncle's name was very celebrated throughout France still. Not so much the rest of Europe, but throughout France. So now you've got Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, president of France. 4 years later, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte decides he doesn't like being president. He wants to change the government again because they're French and they like to keep things confusing. So he actually goes before the people. He takes kind of a referendum, and the people approve it. And they say, yeah, we're okay with that. We're okay if you change the government. Once again, the Second Republic is very short-lived. In 1852, the empire is created again, or restored, as he said, and he takes the title Emperor Napoleon III. So, when you're talking about Napoleon Bonaparte, he's the one, if you're just going to call somebody Napoleon, it's him. And he also is called, Emperor Napoleon I. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte equals Emperor Napoleon III. He kind of takes the same approach that Louis the 18th had taken and his supporters in taking that name. Napoleon, I'm about to cough again, hang on. Napoleon III, he argues that Napoleon's son should have been Emperor Napoleon II. He argues that the Congress of Vienna kind of illegally discarded the empire, so he takes the name Napoleon III. So technically we would say, nah, there's no Louis the 17th. Nah, there's no Louis the Emperor Napoleon II. They didn't do anything in power. But they try to honor that legacy to say, well, no, our previous form of government should have stuck around. So, wrong one again. Emperor Napoleon III is in power now for a while, still rocking the mustache. I don't know what you call that form of mustache, but looks like it would hurt. These failed revolutions that I mentioned in 1848 were very discouraging to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Got a cough. So, Karl Marx, that same year, wrote a book with Engels entitled The Communist Manifesto. One of the very top best-selling books of all time. It's kind of like the Bible and Mao Zedong's thoughts in communist China because he forced everyone to buy it, and then the Communist Manifesto is up there too. Marx, his views set forth this idea of communism, but at this time also known as Marxism, which is an idea that history is the story of class struggle and that ultimately the proletariat will overthrow the bourgeoisie. Now, of course, I just explained that Louis Philippe was called the bourgeois monarch, kind of meaning the middle class monarch. However, Karl Marx has to go and confuse that by having a little bit of a different definition. He refers to all of history as being a class struggle. He says you can go to any point in history and there was a class struggle that was occurring. And right now, he's saying in the 1800s, you had the proletariat. By the proletariat, he means the industrial working class, and the bourgeois or bourgeoisie, the ruling class. So under Karl Marx's interpretation, the bourgeois, these would be the industrial owners, the capitalists who are making a profit off of all of these people whose lives really sucked based on what we saw with the Industrial Revolution stuff the other day. So the proletariat, those would be the industrial workers. The bourgeois, they're the ruling class. And Marx says the only way that you can get a resolution to this, where the proletariat will not be taken advantage of, is for there to be an overthrow of the system. They promote an overthrow of the government. And that's scary to a lot of people. That means that they're actually going to try to provoke change. They're going to try, supporters of Marxism would seek to lead a change that could have major ramifications. So in U.S. history, if you're familiar with that, and labor movements and whatnot, people were scared to death of Marxists coming in, or people who wanted to try to overthrow the government, lead a revolution. And Marx really hoped that the 1848 revolutions would occur and would result in the bourgeoisie being overthrown. And then in his ideal society, and again, communism, it's good in theory. In practice, it doesn't work out that way, and there are a lot of problems with it. Once we get well into the Cold War towards the end of this class, we'll talk about those problems in more detail. But ideally, he's talking about a society where there's no private property, there's no racism, there's no class distinction. Everyone is kind of on the same class level, so no one has the right to be wealthier than anybody else. And there's they're trying to break down barriers between different cultures, between different social status people, to form an ideal society. So it's a nice ideal, but it doesn't work that way so much in practice. So now you've got communism that's out there. And then early socialism is a little bit different from how we view socialism today. Socialism today usually refers more to having some private property with some government ownership in your economic system. Early socialism at this time, these are people who look at the Industrial Revolution that we talked about. They say, okay, it's obvious that this sucks for a lot of people, but instead they want to improve those social conditions. They're not so much out to have this whole revamping of the political system, or lead an overthrow like the Marxists wanted to do, but they thought humans were capable enough of noble expression to be able to improve these social conditions on their own and make a better society. And so one of the famous examples would be the New Lanark Mill in Scotland. And this was a mill where instead of people being forced to work these long days, 6 days a week, the founder of this place he has one of the first daycares at work. People who live in the mill village, they have daycares so their children can go to daycares. They try to make a happy type of work environment. They pay the workers slightly more. They live in better housing than the urban tenements that we saw previously, that most Industrial Revolution workers were in. They worked fewer hours. There were hours set, so everybody was working the same amount of hours. And what this ended up meaning for this mill is that people said, oh, well, those people aren't working the right amount of hours, and you're not working them as hard. That means your production's going to go down. But you ended up with happier workers who tended to be more productive. They were better fed, they were better rested, they had better lives to go home to, they didn't have to worry about their kids, conditions were safer, and they ended up being more productive. So they hoped that this would be an example of how a mill could operate if people were just willing to make those sacrifices. But we tend to know pretty well in our society that that's a risky thing to try. So it didn't always. Again, with socialism, you had to rely on that cooperation. And so Robert Owen, who had founded this mill, he actually tried to expand the same notion to a mill in the United States. I think it was in Indiana, but the rest of them never took off. But early socialists, they wanted to improve things based on human cooperation, saying, okay, instead of being forced to do this, let's be good human beings and see what evolves from there. Then this last ism we'll address, which is a big one and still really big today, nationalism. This sense of national consciousness based on an awareness of being part of a community or a nation that has common institutions, traditions, language, and customs. So, the best way that I think what gives a more powerful illustration of this today would be something like the Cherokee Indian Nation, or one of the Native American nations. They're referred to as a tribal nation living within the government system of the United States, or the Palestinian nation. They don't so much have their own state, but they're a very united people group. And that's the idea of a nation coming together, that there can be a bunch of different nations. Nation is more like a culture, and people from these cultures who are closely tied together, they can all live within the same state. And so Europe is full of especially as we get into the 20th century, there's going to be a lot of racism based on this nationalism stuff. There's still fights that occurred just a couple of years ago. There was a big at the Australian Open tennis match. There was a big fight between fans of Novak Djokovic from Serbia and an opposing player from Bosnia, which is right next to Serbia, but those countries were in a big war between their nations in the 1990s. There's still a lot of hatred there based over these ethnic differences that can occur there. So nationalism is going to jump more and more on the forefront, and it's going to help unite some countries to make them more powerful. So we've talked about Prussia before. Prussia is one of several of the Germanic states. There are all these different states. The states have their own government form. You got Hanover and Saxony and Bavaria, and all within this area, kind of right below the Denmark Peninsula. And Prussia is just one of several of those states. But Prussia has a prime minister named Otto von Bismarck. And von Bismarck is a brilliant political strategist. He wants to see Prussia grow and rise. He knows that all of those people from those other little Germanic states, they share the same national heritage, the same national background. They speak the same language. They have pretty much the same traditions throughout their history. And he rallies them together to try to unite them into a larger country. He wants to unite all those Germanic countries. Now, if he does that, if he unites all of these different places, one place that won't be very happy would be France. France would be right on the border of that. They don't want another powerful country right there on their border. So a war is fought, called the Franco-Prussian War, 1870 to 1871. This is a war between the French and the Prussians and their allies. The other Germanic states fought alongside Prussia. France loses the war, surprise, surprise. This is a painting of a ceremony crowning the new Kaiser, which is like an emperor of this newly united Germanic kingdom. And it takes place in Versailles. They really tried when these Germans, or Prussians, and the other Germanic states won this. They really tried to rub it in the face of the French by basically creating their new empire in Versailles, the famous palace built by Louis XIV, the Sun King. So now Germany is created in 1871. So Germany almost 100 years younger than the United States, technically. You've got Kaiser, which again is like an emperor. It's taken from that, or even the czars that we talked about with Russia and the Tsarina. It's that old title from Caesar, and Kaiser's kind of the Germanic translation of that. With Kaiser Wilhelm I, so he's sort of the ceremonial figure, and Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Von Bismarck, who had been the one who kind of pieced all this together, still retains a significant position as Chancellor of this new German Empire in 1871. Again, put it together largely based on these feelings of nationalism, telling the other Germanic states there's no reason why we shouldn't join together as one big nation state. Italy goes through a similar process. Italy had been a bunch of different little states and kingdoms, but Italy in the 1860s unites. And so now by 1871, things look really, really different. You've got an Italian kingdom. You've got a new Germany that's become much bigger than just Prussia and those other little states in there. Still a powerful Austria-Hungary, still a powerful Russia, France hanging in there, even though they lost this Franco-Prussian War. So things are going to be looking very, very different, and a lot of changes happen as we get closer and closer to the 20th century and a lot of these famous and very tragic wars. So again, you're welcome to view this as needed, but that's kind of a very brief summary of our isms and these political movements of the 19th century that are occurring pretty regularly in Europe.